From the Mercy One studio.
Man Up, brought to you by Construction Professionals, a program dedicated to inspiring and helping men live lives of heroic virtue. Join Joe Stopulos every Monday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Iowa Catholic Radio. And now, it's time to Man Up.
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. We are broadcasting today on the Mercy One studio, heard on 1150 AM, 88.5 FM and 94.5 FM. Around the globe, streaming online at iowacatholicradio.com and on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. I am Joe Stopulos. Today I am joined by the great Joseph Pearce, and we're going to discuss great literature. All things about great literature. Joseph Pearce, one of the foremost experts in Catholic literature today, all the great works. Really excited to have Joseph Pearce on for the first of our two-part episode with him on reading great literature. Let us start in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Really excited to get into the conversation with Joseph Pearce on the other side of the break for great literature. One of my favorite subjects, something that I just, quite frankly, wasn't really exposed to until about the last 7 years or so. And it's been a part of the world that I proactively avoided, quite frankly, in high school. I did not like reading assignments. I did not like reading. I was much more interested in video games and playing sports and having fun than I was with reading, until I was introduced in my late 20s to some of the great works of literature. And since then, it's been a fairly decent-sized part of my life, quite frankly. I'm in a book club. I read with some regularity, really trying to make up for the lost time I had throughout my life in not reading these great classics. So if you're a follower of the show, you may remember episodes 63 and 64. I had on with Father Zach, we had Mitch Kapagian on to have an overview on this topic. So if you like what you're hearing today with Joseph Pearce and you want to hear more suggestions and ways to read great literature, we did this a couple years ago with Mitch Kapagian, episodes 63 and 64. I do need to make a plug. Prior to this, last week's episode, the life lessons learned from my grandfather, was arguably the most commented on episode we've ever had. I received lots and lots of feedback on it. So if you haven't listened to it, please go back to the archives in the podcast and listen to it. And feel free to share it. I just heard lots of good feedback from people. So obviously, it means a lot to me. That it was a personal relationship with my grandfather, and then also, I learned so much from him, and I'm glad that he was able, that some of those lessons he taught me, we were able to share with others. So if you missed last week's episode, I just encourage you. We heard a lot of good feedback on it, so I encourage you to go do that as well. Few great events yet to touch on. We've got coming up next Tuesday, the Man Up evening. This is with Bishop William Joensen, his first Man Up event, Our Mission as Men, and it'll be led by Deacon Randy Keel. That is at the Basilica of St. John. Rosary starts at 5:20, Mass at 5:45, and the program starts at 6:30. There is a capacity of 200 for this event, so make sure you can get in there and RSVP if you need be. On December 7th, my favorite event of the year, favorite event of all time probably, John Ricardo will be here for an extraordinary news event. The premiere of The Veil Removed as well. That is Saturday, December 7th at 7 p.m. at the Iowa Events Grand Ballroom. Make sure that you are RSVPing online. You have to buy tickets for it. It will most likely sell out. And as we get closer and closer to the date, the more demand becomes. It's starting to pick up. We already see that, so make sure you get your tickets. So we're going to head to a short break. When we return, I will have on with me Joseph Pearce, and we will be discussing reading great literature. Stick around, and we'll be right back.
Thank you, Construction Professionals, for underwriting Man Up. Construction Professionals have been long supporters of Iowa Catholic Radio, and we've seen their work firsthand. It's very impressive. They do remodeling or new construction that is innovative, functional, and designing what you want. CPCustomHomes.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and John Lee and Eddie in the Morning is provided by Five Sons Naturescapes. Five Sons Naturescapes is a Catholic veteran-owned family company providing premium outdoor landscapes. Extend your living space outdoors with patios, pergolas, fencing, and retaining walls. Outdoor lighting is another way to enjoy your landscaping day and night. Five Sons Naturescapes will spend the time to understand your needs and create your perfect outdoor space. Learn more about Five Sons Naturescapes at fivesonsnaturescapes.com. Thank you to Five Sons Naturescapes for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Thank you to Golden Rule for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
At Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, we do our best to serve the people and communities who so generously support us. We try and find some way to give back every single month because we know everyone can use some help. Golden Rule is very thankful for all of our customers and your continued support of us. We would like to wish you and yours a very blessed holiday season. I'm Bobby from Golden Rule, where we deliver respect, understanding, loyalty, expertise, and service every time you call. We have a standard and we prove it with every job. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
My help comes from you. You're right here pulling.
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I am excited today to have Joseph Pearce join me. 25 years ago, he was a radical activist, a skinhead, and the editor of 2 hate-filled extremist magazines. Today, Joseph Pearce is the author of several critically acclaimed best-selling biographies of great 19th and 20th century Christian authors. He's the co-founder and co-editor of an international magazine dedicated to reclaiming Catholic culture. Today, he is the director of the Augustine Institute's book publishing. And Joseph Pearce is, to me, one of the foremost experts in all things great literature. Joseph Pearce, welcome to the show.
It's good to be on.
You are, as I maybe joked to you previously, that you're the patron saint of our book club. Yeah, every time we're wondering where things go, we just say, what would Joseph Pearce say about this? So it's a pleasure to have you on. I can think of no one better to talk about literature with than yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be a patron. I'm not quite so comfortable about the adding of the word saint.
You're
I'm
getting
not sure
there.
I qualify.
You're getting there.
I am working on it, by the grace of God.
That's good. Well, I want to start at the top. You know, one of the questions I had a buddy of mine asked me when I told him I was interviewing you, he said, I would ask him, how would you define literature? You know, what in your opinion is literature versus just books and stories in general?
Yeah, well, basically, you know, you have to go back to ask really fundamental questions to answer that question properly. And basically, you know, let's go back one step further to one of the ultimate questions, quid est veritas? What is truth? The question that Pontius Pilate asks. Because the point is that the way that God communicates truth to us is through the process of telling stories. So history is itself his story, and within his story, he enters his story during the incarnation, and the greatest story ever told, as the Hollywood movie called it, is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and subsequently salvation history continues through the founding of the church, etc., through the centuries. So in other words, we live in a story. Our own individual lives are life stories. And so if you like, we're made and designed by God to accept and embrace truth through the telling of stories. So what's true of the stories we get in the gospel and beyond is also true in the stories we tell each other. Again, the parables of Christ are works of fiction, right? The prodigal son never existed. It's a work of fiction that Christ tells us to teach us truths. So really, literature is a means by which we come to the truth.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think of when I'm in the middle of reading a book on the creation of the universe from a scientific standpoint. I think people look at Genesis and they think, well, you know, Genesis didn't talk about the Big Bang. It didn't talk about the cosmos being created and how it was done. I'm like, well, no, but it tells a story, and the story has truth in it. And the whole, I mean, obviously Genesis specifically is not supposed to be a factual telling of how the earth came to be. It's to tell truths of how that came. And I think to your point about Jesus telling parables, these are all timeless. God talked at one point in a specific part of history and talks for all eternity. And how we in today's world can sit here and talk about these parables that were told 2,000 years ago to a completely different time, to a completely different demographic and all this, and they're timeless, and they have truth in them. And I think that's such a great point on how stories resonate throughout generations.
Right, and again, going back to our axiomatic fundamental question, quid est veritas, what is truth? The point is that facts are physical, but truth is metaphysical. So what's interesting about the story of the prodigal son is not the fact that a man had two sons and one of them went off. What's interesting about that story is forgiveness, is learning lessons, is envy, is not learning lessons, is growing in humility through the making of mistakes. And in other words, things such as envy and love and forgiveness are not factual things you can measure physically. They're truthful things that are about our existence. And so on the deepest level, all stories work on that level of metaphysics as well as the level of physics. And that really is the level of truth which makes them truly living. If someone just told us, well, there was this man who had two sons and one of them went off and there was no moral involved, we wouldn't be the least bit interested because it happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, so you wrote a book, and we'll get to your book in a little bit, Literature, What Every Catholic Should Know, and really a lot of what you talk about is rediscovering the great literatures, which obviously then says that there's stuff that's not great literature. If I go to a library, there are tens of thousands of books. You obviously would point us towards what you consider great literature. How are you defining literature versus just regular books versus stories? Can you give us some context and what we should be looking for?
Yeah, well, basically, sometimes I talk about there being four types of books, and these four types of books are based upon there being two types of books. And if that's confusing you, I'll try to try to make the paradox clearer. I sometimes say that there are good bad books. There are bad good books, there are good books, and bad books. And that's because there's two types of good and two types of bad. You can have a work of literature that's good as literature but bad as morality, or a work that's bad as literature but good at morality. And obviously, when I talk about the literature that every Catholic should know, it's not works that are good as literature but bad as morality, nor is it works that are bad as literature but good at morality. These are the good books that are actually told well, they're written well, they're works of beauty in terms of the literary form, but they also convey really beautiful eternal truths.
Well, so you mentioned about eternal truths and beauty, and I think in today's culture, it's easy to say, well, I can watch movies, I can watch TV and find truth and beauty in those things, and I don't have to spend all my time reading a book. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that the watching of movies and TV, apart from the other problems of watching TV, particularly with the commercials and the rest of it, but the very process of watching movies and TV shows is passive. In other words, that we really almost go into a semi-conscious state and let the medium of the moving picture do all the work for us. Whereas if we read a story, that story will take us deeper into it in terms of engagement on our part, and in terms of the engagement of the storyteller on his part, because the whole thing's working on that deeper level of truth, which takes us closer to the truth itself, because truth is to be found de profundis, in the depths, and not merely on the surface.
All right, so I'm going to give you an example. So to me, the greatest adaptation of any movie ever probably is Lord of the Rings, just from the fact that I think they spent 11 hours on the thing. But I'm going to go ahead and out on a limb and say it still falls short. Is that fair?
Yes, and there were two things I would say. First of all, Peter Jackson did basically a movie that's almost 13 hours long to try to do justice to a book. And normally people try to do justice to a book by making a movie that's 2 hours long, and clearly that's just going to be a travesty of it. So Peter Jackson makes a real effort, and that's why his effort is much better than most. But you're quite correct that there's so much that's left out even then. And also the medium is different and has different demands. The things you can do in telling a story, the depth you can go in terms of description and character portrayal in a work of literature goes much deeper than what's possible in a motion picture. And so in consequence, that the people that wrote the screenplay to the adaptation had no choice but to leave out aspects of the book that are crucial to the deeper Christian meaning of The Lord of the Rings. And we should remind ourselves that Tolkien was a lifelong Catholic and described The Lord of the Rings as a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Well, that Catholicism works on levels which is impossible to portray in a movie.
In leaving out entire characters. I mean, it's crazy to think they spent 13 hours and they still had to pull out entire characters. My wife and I, we read David Copperfield a few years ago by Dickens, and we went and got like the best miniseries, and we're talking hours and hours and hours to watch this thing. And one of the top four main characters in the book isn't even in there. They had to pull him out, and it's like a 16. That was really long, and they still couldn't even do it justice. And I think the other thing that's interesting is when you're reading great literature, how often you savor on the words, and you can read and reread the passages and kind of soak into them. Whereas the movie, it's just off and running, and you can't do that as much.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, is that basically that great literature can take us into a level of contemplation. And Thomas Aquinas tells us basically that the modes of perception is that humility leads to gratitude, which leads to wonder, and that wonder leads to contemplation. Now, I would argue that in reading literature, because we are forced to slow down and to take time and not waste it, which is itself one of the best things we can do in every single day, is to take time and not waste it. That literature is time taken in contemplation, and contemplation is what Thomas Aquinas says leads to that dilation, dilatatio, the dilation of the heart and mind and soul into the fullness of reality. Great literature takes us to that level of contemplation, which opens the mind and the heart to the fullness of reality. I would argue that rarely, if ever, can a motion picture do that.
Yeah, and it's something, as again I mentioned the first part of this episode, if I was assigned a reading book in high school, I was going to find a movie to teach me what I had to do to pass the test. It wasn't until my late 20s that I actually finally got into it, and it's just such an enjoyable world, and just my first real book I read of any magnitude was The Tale of Two Cities. And I just remember thinking, man, the language is so rich. The truths are so rich. Everything is so much better than a movie could possibly show. And that was a revelation that I didn't have until my late 20s. And so, as I mentioned, I'm just playing catch up now. I'm just trying to catch up. So how did you get into the works of great literature?
Well, we're all playing catch up because there's so much out there and so little time in our proverbial 80 years and 10. You know, we all know that when we die, there's going to be a list of books that we haven't read. So you know, that's fine. That's part of the riches of the world in which we live. It's inexhaustible, the treasures that are available to us. So I also started late. I didn't really get into literature until I was in my teens, and not really in a deep level until I was in my 20s. But it's been a labor of love since then. It's been the main. Well, not the main passion of my life has been Jesus Christ and my wife and children, but it certainly is up there as part of that mix of the things that I'm really passionate about, not least because it's not a distraction from those other things. It's something that takes me deeper into an understanding of who I am, who my neighbor is, who God is, and what the relationship of those various things are to each other. And literature teaches us that. So it's part, if you like, my spiritual growth, my spiritual exercise every day is to actually read good books.
Your conversion into the Catholic Church books played a part, right? In some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say that under grace, obviously, to God be the glory, and let's not forget that. But under grace, the greatest single influence on my conversion to Catholicism was G.K. Chesterton, coming across the writings of Chesterton, and it was not just the beauty of the truths that he enunciated and explained in his works and showed forth in his works, but the way in which he did it with the beauty of the language, the beauty of the use of the English language. Because for me, beauty is more attractive. Sorry, truth is more attractive if it's beautiful, and truth is always beautiful. But sometimes you get arid tomes where where people are talking about abstract concepts in a philosophical sense, and you think, how can someone make something as beautiful as truth so dull? Well, great literature never makes beautiful truths dull.
Yeah. So, if I'm a guy, I'm trying to get into reading great literature, where would you start? I mean, I think it's difficult to send somebody into, Dante for their first exploration into great literature. What are some recommendations you would have?
Yeah, I mean, obviously one aspect of my book, Literature What Every Catholic Should Know, is to be, if you like, the gateway into the whole world of the great literature that all Catholics should know, or they should endeavor to know. So, I offer the whole panorama, because, trying to offer an individual book when asked a question such as one you've just asked depends so much on the individual person. Yep. Some people prefer poetry to prose. Some people like historical fiction. So you have to know more about the person before you can answer the question. So what I do in that book, relatively short book, is to go through the great works of Western civilization from the earliest, Homer and the ancient Greeks, right through to the 20th century. We mentioned Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, T.S. Eliot, and in America, Flannery O'Connor, Walker Percy. So take you right through to the 20th century. So it's a way of, and I say a little little bit about each one. Maybe that's enough, if you like, for individual readers to say, well, actually, that sounds interesting to me, as opposed to something else which might not be as interesting. Yeah. But that's a really, the dignity of the human person and the uniqueness of all of us, it's difficult to give a one-size-fits-all answer.
That's fair. I'll allow that. So I think the answer is the answer to me is go buy the book, Literature, Whatever Catholics Should Know, and then start there and then figure out where you're going. Another plug for you. Another plug would be Poems Every Catholic Should Know, another book of yours. I think those would be two great starting points for all of our listeners to say, okay, read these, chew through them. One of the examples I would use, I don't know, I read earlier this year a Ben Shapiro book called The Right Side of History, and he really talks about going from Aristotle all the way to the founding of this country and beyond, the political or the philosophical reasons, how everything was built on top of each other. And it gives you a really good view from 10,000 feet of, okay, how did this all progress? What built on top of what to understand the philosophical reasonings that created the West, that created the United States. I think your book does that very well with language or literature. And so I think it really helps to give you a base of walking you through from Homer all the way to today, to give you an understanding of just that baseline of where should I know, what should I know about these books, and then to your point, now I'll know where to dive into. What do I want to dive into? Another reference or another resource of yours are the Ignatius Critical Editions, and I think I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I think an important thing, and it really came to fruition for me recently when I read the Portrait of Dorian Gray, is to understand the context behind the book. And so if you're just reading the book, you're going to miss a lot of the context. And I think your podcast, you have two different ones, the Faith and Culture series and the Great Works in Western Literature, which a plug for you again, go listen to those podcasts. But could you talk to us about the Ignatius Critical Editions and why they would be important for someone entering this world of literature?
Yeah, in fact, as is befitting an interview about literature, there's a story behind the Ignatius Critical Editions. That it's quite a few years ago when I was teaching literature at Ave Maria University in Florida. I was teaching a course on Romanticism and set for my students as a set text both Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And I was horrified by the additions that I actually, basically mandated my students to buy because of the hideous, horrible modern ideas, queer theory, feminism, Marxism, radical relativism, anti-Christianity, putting all of this into the hands of my students. So I came up with the idea and suggested to Ignatius Press we should bring out a series of Ignatius Critical Editions where the whole work would be published, the whole book with annotations, but there would be an introduction and a series of contemporary critical essays by tradition-oriented critics that would actually look at the work within the context of the author's own understanding of it, rather than trying to project 21st century bad philosophy onto the Christian writers of the past. Let's take the works on the terms and see them through the eyes of the authors themselves and contextualize them with these introductions and critical essays. And we've now published 27 titles in the series, and I think it's a great service for those that want to read the great classics of literature without being poisoned or affronted by some of the nonsense that's out there today. Yeah,
and again, I think it really helps to bring to light a lot of the truths that the author's trying to bring out, especially from a Catholic point of view. So again, my thank you to you for just that labor of love that you're doing. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And so our listeners who are trying to get into literature, that's a great starting point. We have to head to a break. We will have you on again next week to really dive. I've got a lot of questions about specific book titles, but I do want could you plug your website real quick? I think that's a great place for people to follow to understand what's going on in the world of literature today.
Yes, my personal website is very easy to remember. It's jpearce, JPEARCE.co.
Very good. Joseph Pearce, thank you again so much for joining us on this first part episode of Reading Great Literature. When we come back next week, we're going to have you on. I'm going to pepper you with lots of questions on book recommendations and where we can go further into this. So again, thank you very much, Joseph.
My pleasure. God bless you.
All right, we're going to head to a short break, and we will be right back.
Why do folks give to the Catholic Tuition Organization? Probably because they love Catholic schools, right? Well, partially, but they also like the tax benefits, or they were helped when their kids were in school, or they have been blessed and want to bless others. Whatever the reason, the 65% tax credits are great, and after all, it's for the kids and their future. Online, ctoiowa.org.
Thank you to Mercy College of Health Sciences, downtown Des Moines, for underwriting our show, The Uncommon Good, with me, Bo Bonner.
And I'm Bud Marr. A degree from Mercy College provides endless possibilities. Students have access to patients with complex medical conditions, state-of-the-art medical facilities, highly motivated healthcare professionals, and classroom professors that transform them into servant leaders.
You can start the programs in fall, spring, or summer. There are endless possibilities available online at mchs.edu/kwky.
My help comes from you. You're right here putting.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. My thanks again to Joseph Pearce. Again, no better person to have on to talk about literature than him, and I'm excited to have him on again next week to continue our conversation. There's obviously a lot more to cover, and I can't encourage you enough to go out and get those two books, Literature, What Every Catholic Should Know, Poems, and also Poems Every Catholic Should Know. Two things I've got to comment on today. It is November 11th. Two important holidays / feast days. One is today is the feast day of St. Martin of Tours. St. Martin of Tours, especially for men, just a really a great model for us, a manly man who loved Christ and fought for the church. And one of the other big things is a lot of men struggle with alcoholism, reformed alcoholics. He is their patron saint. I think it's important for us to rely upon the saints, and I think that's a really good for anyone who is struggling with any sort of addictions, but specifically to alcoholism. I think please invite Martin Tours into your life. He's also the patron saint of soldiers, and today is Veterans Day in America. This holiday's always held a special place in my heart, obviously with my grandpa and my grandma, who were both soldiers. My grandpa, who was a captain and flew missions on D-Day, missions throughout World War II. My grandma, who was as we heard a few weeks ago, was the first woman Marine in Scott County, possibly in Iowa. We're waiting to find out on that. But obviously, I just have a tremendous respect for all of our veterans. Obviously, my co-host currently is gone. Father Zach is out doing basic training right now with the Air Force, and I know Father Zach also has just a tremendous respect for the military, so much so that he went and is now ministering to them as well. So our prayers for all those who have served and who are serving today. Please thank your veterans and keep them in your prayers. Thank you again for joining me on Man Up. My name is Joe Stopulos. It's time to man up.
Man Up, inspiring men to live out their call to holiness with Joe Stopulos. Heard Mondays at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Iowa Catholic Radio. Brought to you by Construction Professionals.